Welcome, everyone. We have a little bit different setup here today. Hopefully you're doing well. It's Career Happy Hour. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Career Happy Hour, this is an opportunity for each one of us to press pause and to make a decision for ourselves as to how did we do this week and what do we want to do differently next week to propel ourselves forward in our careers and lives. And this is designed for you. I don't do this for myself. I do this to help members of our community. And yes, this is a community. This Career Happy Hour community is here to support your success through the chat. Now, if you have a question or you want to share your LinkedIn profile in the chat, go ahead and do that. I'm actually delivering my live stream today on my iPad. This is a first time. Let me know how the audio is sounding for you. The video might be a little bit different because I've got it set up on my desk, and I hope it doesn't fall over. It's kind of precariously positioned. If you don't know me, my name is Andrew Beach. I am a teacher of self-education. I help professionals like you communicate value to find great opportunities faster, whether you're working or not. That's through a pragmatic process of branding, professional branding, planning, i.e. putting together a career map, and the third step would be effective networking. So that is what I refer to as the 3 steps to career success. Underneath that is trust. And many times we overlook the value of relationships, and that's what networking is all about. It isn't so much the fact that you're meeting people or building connections on LinkedIn. That's in a lot of ways table stakes. What we're looking to do is create trusting relationships, and that's what networking really is. It's the progressive building of trusting relationships over time. We are continuing this week, and of course, if you have any questions about, let's see, I think I can put the little things on here. No, that's not it. That's not it. Text. Showing me anything. That's weird. There we go. Okay. Questions. Showing the stream. There we go. So it's working. The iPad is working perfectly, just as designed. If you have any questions regarding networking, job search, career mapping, whatever, go ahead and put those in the chat. I'll do my best to answer either as the stream goes along or sometime during the end of the stream. We're continuing our work here today in a book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty by Harvey Mackay. Still alive, by the way. I think he's in his 90s, celebrated a 90th birthday, I believe, this last year. And we're just continuing reading in here. Occasionally, we'll do this. We'll have a situation where we read a book, kind of like I suppose, a book club. It keeps me accountable. Thank you for that. To actually read a book, sit down and read a book together. And it'll be archived on, right now we're broadcasting live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook in my group, and also on LinkedIn. So just let me know where you're joining from, which of these channels you'll be watching the replay, and if you have any questions. Good news, we're on chapter 64 of this great book by Harvey Mackay. And the metaphor here, I guess the thing he's talking about is digging a well before you're thirsty, meaning putting effort in before you need to actually withdraw water from that. You could think of it kind of like a bank account, that you're making deposits in your bank account, and then at some point you'll have the capacity or the opportunity to withdraw from that account. So chapter 64, you never know when the phone is going to ring. Last month, I went to my 50th class reunion. Of course, this is back in the 90s. He wrote this book, I believe, 1990, actually. So it's 32 years old, this book. So 50th reunion was 32 years ago. I heard that, my 50th grade school class reunion. So I'm not quite as old as you might have thought. Of the 42 kids who graduated from 8th grade at Horace Mann Grade School in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1946, 30 returned to their alma mater for the event. As you might expect, we're nearly all grandparents. Almost half of us still live in the Twin Cities. That's in Minnesota. We spent a wonderful evening together at a downtown club and, of course, promised to stay in touch. It wasn't an idle promise. Amazingly, many of us have been doing it for 50 years. I've maintained season greeting card. I found this old picture in the attic, contact with several old classmates, including one who now lives in Florida. Our only face-to-face meetings were at previous reunions. Still, the networking has paid off. Let's find out how. One day my phone rang and there was Jean. Harvey, I happen to sit on the board of the Sundance Institute out of Salt Lake City, Jean said. They're looking for geographic balance, and the Midwest is not represented. Well, I've kind of lost touch with my roots, except for you. Remember that picture you sent me of us playing King of the Hill? We had a lot of fun together. I know you'll love this group. It's Robert Redford's brainchild, a nonprofit arts organization enhancing American filmmaking. He's done a phenomenal job. Bottom line, who wouldn't? And in the 10 years I've served on the Sundance board, it's been even more fun than playing King of the Hill with Jean and I were in 6th grade. It also helped me a great deal in understanding the finer points of filmmaking since my son, David, is a director. I got my foot in the door at the 3M Company, the largest employer in our state, the same way, courtesy of 2 more friends from grade school. Not only have I benefited from my grade school connections, but I've been able to help others. Not only have I benefited from my grade school connections, but I've been able to help others. You see how that works? It's a give and a take. 5 years ago, a former classmate phoned me to ask for my help in finding a job for her son in San Francisco. He had just moved there, had no contacts, and wanted to work for Charles Schwab, the well-known brokerage firm. 3 weeks and 3 phone calls later, her son started at Charles Schwab. He's still there, and he's doing so well, they've asked me for more recommendations. Go figure, if you're a resource for an organization and you find they find that you're a valued resource and you're giving them qualified connections or employment opportunities or customers or whatever, then they will look at you as a hyper referral source and they'll come back to you again and again. So be of value first, and then people will reach out to you. Let's see. When you're 5 or 10 years old, the last thing on your mind is who you may be networking with 40 years later. But it may not have been the last thing on Bill Clinton's mind. At least 2 of Clinton's kindergarten pals, Webb Hubbell and Thomas Mack McClarty, became lifelong friends and wound up in his administration. Was Clinton scrutinizing his playmates even then, checking out the sandbox, scanning the monkey bars for White House potential? 5-year-olds, take note. Before you snatch a cookie away from another kid, are you jeopardizing your future? Well, hey, it's not like we don't put enough pressure on our kids. Do it anyway. You may regret it later, but when you're 5, a cookie is a lot more satisfying than a network. Besides, by the time you're 10, they will have forgotten all about it and you can really start to build your network. If you haven't gone to a 5, 10, 25, or even 50-year reunion, give it a try. It does wonders for your memory and it does wonders for your network too. Mackey's Maxim. You're never too old to start networking, and you're never too young either. In fact, it's funny, I introduced my daughter to somebody in my network this last month, and she went and met with that person, had a great conversation, and she's starting to understand the value of building relationships with people and what that can do. Chapter 65. You can't walk through a door unless you open it. Another way to stay focused on your networking goals is to keep a list in a notebook or in your PC of people you want to meet that you've read about or may have seen on television. Who's on that list for you? Put that in the chat if you would, please. So some of the people I'd like to meet are like Simon Sinek. I'd love to meet Simon Sinek or Marcus Buckingham and that sort of thing. Those are people that I really admire and look up to. Years ago, you'd be amazed at how many big cigars will be willing to walk with you or write to you if you simply make the effort. Hey, it's lonely at the top. Years ago, Lori Peterson, a small-town 12-year-old Minnesota girl, wrote a letter to her hero, Jimmy Carter. who was then president. She wrote him and Mrs. Carter. They wrote her. She sent small gifts. They sent small gifts. She became a successful attorney. They became an ex-president and ex-first lady. They have met several times and continue to maintain contact. It's been going on for over 20 years now. Lori Peterson is one of the few people I know who can include a president and first lady of the United States in their network. Not because she's high-powered Washington pole, but because she had the guts to try. Mackey's maxim: don't be so quick to say no for the other guy, even when the other guy is the commander-in-chief. You'll be surprised how often the other guy says yes. Chapter 66, the world's greatest networker. So, who is the world's greatest networker? The President of the United States. Which president? Any president. Whoever is president at any given moment has made it there and succeeds or fails once in office on the basis of his networking skills. Presidents grub around for votes in New Hampshire snowbanks. They call their friends and their friends' friends begging for money. They bargain with members of Congress, swapping appointments and pork barrel projects for support of their legislative programs. They hold press conferences and try to reach beyond the hostile questioning to score points with the electorate. They travel to military installations to show their concern for the people who are risking their lives for their country. They attend funerals, go abroad, project empathy with minorities and the disadvantaged, kiss babies, visit hospitals, attend fundraisers, listen to lobbyists and big cigars tell them how to run the country. Send up trial balloons, suffer fools, point with pride, and view with alarm. In other words, they are the ultimate networkers. The book Truman by David McCullough contains a story about Harry Truman when he was about to leave office. The Republican candidate, Dwight Eisenhower, had defeated Adlai Stevenson in the presidential election that fall. Ike had made an issue out of the failures of the Truman administration, and there was no love lost between the general and the former haberdasher. Quote, "When Eisenhower gets here," said Truman, pointing at his desk, "he'll sit right here. And he'll say to do this, do that, and nothing will happen. Poor Ike. It won't be a bit like the Army. He'll find it very frustrating." Truman was half right. He knew that the Constitution grants a president only a tiny fraction of what he needs to govern, and that the rest depends on his ability to persuade others to carry out his wishes. But Truman was wrong in assuming that Ike didn't have the ability. Ike succeeded as Supreme Allied Commander in World War II, not because he could bark orders louder than other generals, but because he could handle prickly personalities like Montgomery, Patton, Churchill, and de Gaulle. He listened to their complaints. He mediated their disputes. He let them bask in the limelight. He flattered them. He cajoled them. He asked them for their opinions. He thanked them for their input. Now, anywhere in there did it say he asked for help? No. He listened. He mediated. He flattered. He cajoled. He asked them for their opinions. Opinions, not help. And then he won the war. And then he won the election. And this is how presidents get to be presidents. They write thank you notes. George Bush was known as the Rolodex Kid. Wheelock Whitney, a friend of mine who was a classmate of Bush's, told me that Bush wrote down the name of every person he met at every precinct, city, county, state, and national political gathering he attended over a lifetime, together with whatever personal information. And he made a point of using that information as a creative way to stay in touch. I know that's true because I have friends who heard Bush speak at a local political rally when he was vice president and met him briefly at a cocktail party. One of them promptly got a handwritten personal note from him that contained some factoid Bush had picked up from their meeting. The second one got a telephone call out of the blue one day when Bush was between planes at the Twin Cities airport. Both of these people's substantial business types have been dining out on their close personal friendship with George for the last decade and a half. Bill Clinton, the first Democratic president to be reelected since FDR, told the New York Times that for most of his life, every evening before he turned in, he listed every contact he made that day and entered the names on 3x5 cards with vital statistics, time and place of the meetings, all of the pertinent information duly noted. 3x5 cards. Doesn't have to be technical. Some of us like to use technology or Outlook or phones or some CRM, but a notebook or a 3x5 card is equally as valid. Use what works for you. Richard Nixon found a very creative way to capitalize on all the information he had collected. Say a fellow walked into Nixon's headquarters and said he wanted to work for the candidate. He would be asked what he did for a living. I'm a barber, he might say. Okay, why don't you organize barbers for Nixon? You're the president of the organization. Get a couple of your buddies and make them vice presidents. Get them to get some more people and their presidents and vice presidents for a new chapter on the other side of town. And so on. And each of you throw $50 or so into a pot. When you get a few $1,000s together, come back and we'll put together an ad for you to run in the state barbers trade newspaper. The umbrella organization, Citizens for Nixon, had a ton of these groups going. One of them, Mayors for Nixon, had hundreds of members and so much money, the Sunday before the election, they ran half-page ads in the New York Times and the Washington Post. The Mayors group included several who went on to national prominence, such as Dick Lugar, the senator from Indiana. Fascinating. Politicians make the best networkers. No one story ought to hammer home that point. One more story ought to hammer home that point. Lyndon Johnson began his political career as a congressional aide in Washington. Slaving away in anonymity didn't appeal to the ambitious young Texan. He was eager to make political contacts. Johnson was living at a cheap rooming house favored by other congressional aides. He began to take a half a dozen showers a day so he could run into his peers and build his network. Before long, Johnson was working the rooming house, John, as adroitly as some Poles can work a 4th of July picnic. Johnson didn't waste much time after that. He soon ran for and was elected president of the Congressional Aides' own network, the Little Congress. Johnson's choice of venue for networking may not have been the best place in the world to make new friends, but he had the drive to make use of even the most limited opportunity and turn it to his advantage. Little opportunities, biggest advantage. This is the interesting thing. When you have these very simple, small networks, you often have a more intimate experience and you're able to get more results from it. Presidents push their legislative programs using network techniques. You may think the members of Congress can waltz into the Oval Office anytime they want, but most of them never see the president from the State of the Union speech to the next. On the rare occasions they are invited to the White House, they are like bush leaguers called up to the show. Many years ago, when Lyndon Johnson was president, the Republican congressional leadership consisted of Everett Dirksen of Illinois in the Senate and Charles Halleck of Indiana in the House. These two hard-bitten partisan Midwestern Republicans conducted weekly press conferences, which the press dubbed the Ev and Charlie Show. They used them to blast Johnson. One day, they had been particularly nasty about some legislation Johnson wanted. He invited the two of them to the White House for breakfast, and he got their support. As they left to go back to the Hill, the press converged on them. "Why did you do it, Charlie? He sure knows how much us Indiana boys like our bacon sliced real thick." All was all of the dazzle Charlie could think to say. Not only was the pork served to Halleck's liking, but the rumor is he and Dirksen left with a couple of pork barrel projects for their districts. This became known as the Johnson treatment. If you don't believe a little thing like that can determine the fate of nations, then I bet you didn't believe Newt Gingrich allowed the government to shut down because Bill Clinton made him and Bob Dole exit from the back of Air Force One when they returned from Yitzhak Rabin's funeral. Yes, that is how petty politics can be and how much decisions affecting billions and billions of dollars of legislation can depend on networking. More importantly, on how you treat people. Treating people with kindness and respect, and yes, thick sliced bacon, whatever it might take. You know, you're not looking to butter people up, but you certainly aren't looking to diminish them or degrade them. Yes. Or as Ev used to say, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Sooner or later, it adds up to real money. Mackey's maxim: you don't have to be in politics to be a politician. Learn from the best. Isn't that true? You should model and learn and emulate the best. Chapter 67. And now for the runners-up. Back in the 1920s, people were surprised to see a gentleman in a tuxedo emerging from a manhole on the corner of 42nd and Broadway. The manhole man was Bruce Foraker, head of the Bell telephone system in New York City. As he left the theater on a frigid January night, he passed a manhole where a couple of Bell employees were splicing cable. So he dropped down to have a little chat. How do you suppose Foraker's people felt about working for him? No surprises here. Foraker was called the man of 10,000 friends because his employees held him in such great respect. We could all hope for so much as leaders. A while back, consultant Sarah van der Zanden was seated next to Honeywell CEO Michael Bonsignore at a dinner. They began chatting about a state-of-the-art Honeywell thermostat just installed in her home, which she admitted neither she nor her husband had figured out how to program. Quote, "I can help you with that," Bonsignore said. "Let me know a convenient time and I'll come over and program it for you." Before I concluded the story in his book, I called Honeywell to check on Bonsignore's title. Just dialed the number at the corporate headquarters, 612-951-1000. And asked the operator what Mr. Bonsignore's correct corporate title was. "Michael is CEO," she said. "Michael? You call him Michael?" Honeywell has 53,000 employees at the time. "Excuse me, I mean Mr. Bonsignore," she replied. No, wait a minute. That's perfectly all right. I'm not correcting you. I think it's great you call him Michael." "Well, he's a great guy," she said. "Can you imagine the kind of network internally Michael Bonsignore has with his employees, or why he's CEO of the company?" Medtronic Inc. is a $2.2 billion company. I'm sure it's bigger than that now, with more than 10,000 employees worldwide. Its products are on the cutting edge of medical technology. That's still true today. Though the founder of the company, Earl Bakken, is in his 70s. He travels the world for the company, which now operates in 120 countries. When Medtronic opens a new office, Earl likes to sit down with the employees and explain the mission in the corporate culture. Could you imagine? How would you do that with 53,000 and 10,000 employees? How would you sit down at each site and as you open it or perhaps visit it with 10,000 employees and tell them the company mission and the culture? And listen and answer questions. Could you imagine? The underlying message in all three of these cases comes through loud and clear. If we're going to succeed, we have to be able to communicate freely with each other. We have to be able to share our concerns with each other. We have to care about each other. And we have to be part of each other's network. Mackey's maxim: are you a gateway to information in your organization or a roadblock? Employees respect the former and resent the latter. Be a gateway for information. Chapter 68. Join the grounds crew. Want to be a role model to your troops like Michael Bonsignore? Want to break down communication barriers between management and labor, a la Bruce Foraker? Want to build a network that reaches every employee at every level of your company like Earl Bakken? Here's the best way I know. Spend at least 1 week a year in the trenches, working on the line, pushing the broom, toting the barge, lifting the bale, doing whatever are the toughest, most meaningful jobs the company has to offer. It is a real morale booster if your entire crew were to see you doff your Armanis and actually do the nasty stuff they have to do to make a living for themselves and their families. Believe me, anytime a boss will roll up his or her sleeves and actually do some grunt work, word will reach every corner of the shop. And you know the employees will also spread the word to their network. What a great way to tell the world what you and your company stand for. Besides, most of us who make our livings telling other folks what to do could use a little humbling experience in our lives. This is one way to get it. Mackey's maxim. It doesn't matter how well you're leading if no one's following. No truer words spoken. Chapter 69. Present at the creation. The lonely artist, working far into the night, probing the cosmos for inspiration, painting, composing, writing, whatever else it is creative types do. It sounds epic, mystical, and heroic. There's only one problem. It's a myth. Sure, nobody can do it but you, but it's not done in a vacuum. While you might want the kiddies running around playing cow persons and Native Americans under the table while you're writing the great American novel, that doesn't mean you don't need a network. Great artistic efforts are often the product of schools or salons. In other words, networks. For example, it takes an expert to tell who painted many old masters, because artists and students often work side by side to create them. Great jazz, musicians jamming, that's a network. Paris in the 20s, the Algonquin Round Table, the Black Mountain College, all produced outstanding work because the writers and artists rubbed against each other, figuratively and literally exchanging ideas, criticism, and occasionally bodies. In the 1940s, a talented group of writers emerged from the University of Minnesota Daily, the campus newspaper. Max Schulman was the first to score with a comic novel, Barefoot Boy with Cheek. Norman Katkov wrote several novels, including A Little Sheep, A Little Slumber. He became a successful screenwriter. Thomas Hagen's Mr. Roberts was a best-selling novel, a hit play, and a movie. It was often called the best work of fiction to come out of World War II. For many years, Dorothy Lebedoff was a leading story editor in Hollywood. I knew Schulman casually and once asked him how this tight little group all became such successful writers. Quote, because when I got published, they said to themselves, if that untalented so-and-so can do it, so can I, said Schulman. Competition? Professional jealousy? In a network? Sure. Why not? Creative networks often work that way. Not such a bad thing if it makes the creative juices flow. At the advertising agency Fallon McElliott, they know creative people need the stimulation that comes from being around other creative people. We're in the communication business. We wouldn't be very good at it if we didn't know how to communicate with each other, said Bill Westbrook, who is president and creative director. What are some of the steps the agency takes to encourage networking? Number one, we always schedule meetings off the floor that the people work on. Why? So they're forced to see what's hanging on the walls outside their own area. That encourages feedback, comments, compliments, and mixing with one another. Number two, we hold quarterly meetings with the entire payroll to show everyone the new work that is being done, including work in progress. At these meetings, we always have one department make a full-blown presentation on what they're doing. We want everyone to have a handle on what's going on throughout the shop. Number three, writers and art directors work in triads with designers, so they have a design perspective as well as an advertising perspective. It's very unusual in our business to do this. Four, if you work for an advertising agency, how can you know what sells unless you've seen your agency try and sell it? Until they come to work for us, 99.9% of our people had never seen a full-scale presentation of an advertising pitch to a client. After we landed the McDonald's Arch Deluxe account, we gave all our people exactly the same presentation we gave to McDonald's. Number five, we gave a lot of thought to what our common areas would be like. We made a full-scale replica of a diner so that everyone would want to come and eat lunch there and goof off, take their coffee breaks, rub elbows. Too many company common areas feel like a prison mess hall. So true. Mackey's maxim, inspiration you can do alone. Execution requires other people. Good point. Chapter 70. Man, we're rocking it today. Pat O'Brien's networking story, how to stay in touch. Introduction. Did you ever notice that all-seeing eye that CBS uses for its logo? I think it belongs to Pat O'Brien, who is synonymous with CBS Sports. Pat is the networker's networker. He knows everyone. He goes everywhere. He is a human butterfly. When he lands, it's never for more than a nanosecond because he's always on the fly to the next event. If they held a basketball tourney, a tennis tournament, and a football game, bang, 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 one right after another, Pat could cover them all. In fact, he has. After hosting this year's NC2A Final Four and the U.S. Open Tennis Championship, Pat jumped back into the studio to host CBS's coverage of college football alongside analyst Craig James. He's also put his stamp on the 1996 Summer Olympics with a series of syndicated specials called The Road to Olympic Gold, which he hosted with Mary Lou Retton. He guest hosts the nightly television show Entertainment Tonight and writes monthly columns in both Live Magazine and Inside Sports. He also can be heard daily on his national radio shows, Sports Time, Sports Flashback, and Sports Fan Today, as well as live on Sundays doing his national radio show, Coast to Coast with Pat O'Brien. Easy to reach? Hell no. Though we're good friends, my batting average is lower than any ball player who's ever appeared on one of his own shows. That's okay. Pat and I know how to stay in touch, even when we have to do it by remote control. I'm constantly forwarding messages and getting messages through Jaxie, his trusted assistant. Phone rings. Quote, Pat told me to call. Tell Harvey I'm thinking of him and to watch Sampras at Wimbledon if he ever wants to improve that pathetic serve of his. Phone rings. Quote, Harvey asked me to call. Tell Pat I just ran across an old classmate of his who went to school with him in South Dakota. We've managed to stay in contact all these years, mostly by throwing messages over the fence. But I know he's there for me if I ever really need him. As demonstrated by the following networking story. Thanks, Pat. I'm still working on my serve. Here's the Pat O'Brien's networking story. Networking got me to network. It's true. I got my first job at a television network, NBC, because I knew somebody who knew Tom Brokaw. And I didn't have to be in a big city, be from a blue chip family, or make 100 phone calls. I simply went to the University of South Dakota and became a government major. Unknowingly, I became one of the greatest networking successes in higher education. His name is Dr. William O. Farber. Doc Farber was the chairman of political science department, and his calling in life was and is networking. Each and every year, Dr. Farber takes a student under his wing. It usually is a student not living up to the potential Doc sees in him or her. I was one of those students. So was Tom Brokaw. So was Gnatz L. Newharth, the founder of USA Today. So were South Dakota Senator Tim Johnson and former South Dakota Senator Larry Pressler. So was Phil Odeen, CEO of BDM, a billion-dollar corporation, plus 2 federal judges. So was Ken Bode of Washington Week in Review. So was Robert Swanson, who left General Mills to become CEO at Greyhound and ended up at Del Webb. The list is 40 deep. Through the years, the Farber Network has covered public service and government, business, broadcasting, and law. His goal was to form a network so solid that no student of his ever had to go to a career day seminar. Chosen Farber students got to borrow Doc's network of successes. Quote, it is surprising how you can put people together, Doc now says. For example, in 1969, a year before I graduated, I decided I want to be in television. Doc reminded me that he had a student who is now the anchorman of KNBC in Los Angeles. It turned out to be Brokaw, who made one phone call and got me a job at NBC in Washington. Wow, 2 days on the job, and I was David Brinkley's research gopher. Farber, who is now the youngest 86-year-old in America, is still sending kids out into the world. His theory is this: no one ever reaches his or her full potential. It's not the talent you are given that counts. It's what you have done with it. In short, any student who comes under Doc Farber's wing succeeds. I've never seen a track record like this. The network he has setup is surefire, mainly because those of us who call ourselves Farber boys, yes, there are women too, would do anything for him because he made us live up to our potential and he helped us get to where we are today. 3 or 4 times a year, Brokaw and Ike and company will get a call from our old professor that begins like this, quote, "Say, I was wondering," and we respond, "Whatever you need." We sent kids to Washington, D.C. We've set up scholarships. We've arranged meetings with his students and world figures. It is our way of paying him back, although we will always be indebted to him. We continue to perpetuate his network, and that's all he wants. The ultimate networker doesn't want anything more than to keep the thing going. So true. It's not a scheme, it's the way things work. When I called Dr. Farber about this book, the first thing he said to me was, "Say, I've got a student who wants to get an interview at Arizona State." We got him an interview. That's funny. Mackey's Maxim. I don't know what I'll be doing a year from now, but whatever it is, I undoubtedly will be based on the contacts I made today. So that brings us to step 9. This might be the last section of the book we read. So step 9, all's well that ends well. We'll pick that up next week and we'll conclude this thing, gosh, right before the holiday weekend. And thank you. I appreciate it. So let me see here if there's any chats awaiting. No chats awaiting? Okay, folks. Thank you for coming today. It's Career Happy Hour. Again, Andrew Beach. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box or the comment section below. And you can also reach me at Branding Dynamo on most of the social networks. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Career Happy Hour. Bye now.